Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Mordecai stood in the grand hall of his fortress, gazing at the stone walls lined with ancient tomes and magical artifacts. The room was a monument to his power, a testament to the decades he had spent mastering the arcane arts. Yet, even as the kingdom whispered of his brilliance, Mordecai felt an insatiable hunger gnawing at his soul. Knowledge, it seemed, was never enough. Power had become an addiction, one that no amount of study or conquest could satisfy. He turned his gaze to the mirror of souls, its surface dark and foreboding, reflecting nothing but shadows. The mirror had been his greatest discovery, a relic older than any mage alive, hidden deep within the enchanted forest. Legend spoke of its ability to reveal the deepest truths of the heart, but Mordecai knew it held more than that. The mirror could offer him something far greater, power beyond imagination, the kind that could bend the very fabric of reality to his will, but there had been warnings, of course. The texts he'd uncovered spoke of the mirror's dark side, of its ability to consume the souls of those who gazed too deeply into it. Mordecai had dismissed those tales as myths, the ramblings of weaker minds who could not comprehend the true potential of such an artifact. He was different. He was the most powerful mage the kingdom had ever known. The mirror would not control him. He would master it. With a wave of his hand, Mordecai dismissed the protective wards he had placed around the mirror. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and a strange pressure pressed against his chest, as if the very atmosphere resisted his presence. He ignored the sensation and stepped forward, standing directly before the mirror. For a moment, nothing happened. The surface of the mirror remained still, a flat, dark reflection of the room. But then, slowly, the shadows within it began to swirl, forming shapes, images that flickered and danced just beyond recognition. Mordecai leaned in closer, his heart quickening with anticipation. What secrets would it reveal to him? What ancient powers had been lost to time, waiting for someone like him to claim them? The shapes solidified, becoming scenes, memories from Mordecai's past. He saw himself as a young apprentice, eager and bright, devouring every spell and incantation his masters could offer. He saw the battles he had fought, the enemies he had vanquished, the moments of triumph when he had stood victorious over those who dared to challenge him. It was a glorious history, one that filled him with pride. But then, the scenes changed. The mirror began to show him darker moments, decisions made in the pursuit of power that had cost him more than he realized. He saw the faces of those he had betrayed, allies cast aside, enemies destroyed without mercy. He saw the kingdom suffering under his rule, the people fearful and broken. And then, the mirror showed him something he had never allowed himself to see, his own soul, hollow and twisted, consumed by ambition. Mordecai recoiled, but it was too late. The mirror's grip on him tightened, its whispers growing louder in his mind. It promised him more power, but at a cost. The more he gazed into it, the more it fed on his insecurities, his fears. The shadows in the mirror reached out, wrapping around him like tendrils, binding him to the artifact. He tried to pull away, but the mirror had already begun to take hold of him, drawing him deeper into its depths. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in his life, Mordecai felt fear. He was losing control, not just of his magic, but of himself. The mirror wasn't just showing him the truth, it was consuming him, twisting his mind, warping his thoughts. The power he had sought so desperately was turning against him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Lyra stood at the edge of the village, watching the dark clouds gather over Mordecai's fortress. The storms had started a few weeks ago, unnatural and fierce, and they had only grown worse with time. The crops were dying, the animals were restless, and the people whispered of dark magic at work. Lyra knew the truth. She had felt the shift in the air, the surge of power that rippled through the kingdom. Something was wrong with Mordecai, her master, the man she had once admired more than anyone else. Lyra was no stranger to magic. As Mordecai's apprentice, she had learned more in a few short years than most mages did in a lifetime. But lately, Mordecai had become distant, secretive, obsessed with something he wouldn't share. His behavior had grown erratic, his temper short, and the fortress, once a place of learning, had become cold and foreboding. She had tried to speak with him, but he had brushed her off, telling her to focus on her studies and leave him to his work. But Lyra couldn't ignore the signs. The kingdom was suffering, and she feared that Mordecai's experiments had something to do with it. She had heard rumors of a magical artifact, something ancient and dangerous that he had been searching for. And now, with the storms growing worse and the kingdom on the brink of disaster, Lyra knew she had to act. Gathering her courage, she made her way to the fortress, her cloak pulled tight against the biting wind. The path was treacherous, the ground slick with rain, but Lyra pressed on, her mind focused on one thing: saving Mordecai. She refused to believe that he was beyond help. He had been her mentor, her guide, and she couldn't let him fall victim to whatever dark magic had taken hold of him. As she approached the fortress, the air grew thick with the weight of magic. It pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe, but Lyra didn't falter. She reached the gates and slipped inside, the once familiar halls now filled with an eerie silence. The walls seemed to pulse with dark energy, and Lyra could feel the malevolent force emanating from deeper within the fortress. She made her way toward Mordecai's chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the door, she paused, gathering her thoughts. She had no idea what she would find inside, but she knew she had to be prepared for anything. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The sight that greeted her sent a chill down her spine. Mordecai stood before the mirror of souls, his body rigid, his eyes wide and unseeing. The mirror's surface was alive with shadows, swirling and shifting, tendrils of darkness reaching out to wrap around him. His once proud and commanding presence was now a hollow shell, and Lyra could see the strain in his face, the battle he was losing against the mirror's influence. "Master." Lyra called, rushing to his side. "What have you done?" Mordecai didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the mirror, his lips moving in silent whispers as if he were speaking to something only he could hear. Lyra placed a hand on his arm, trying to pull him away, but the moment her fingers touched his skin, a surge of dark energy shot through her, forcing her back. The mirror's power was overwhelming, a force so strong that it felt like it was suffocating her. Lyra stumbled, clutching her chest as she gasped for air. She could feel the mirror's influence, its tendrils reaching out to her, trying to pull her in, but she fought against it, forcing herself to stand. "Mordecai, you have to stop," she shouted, her voice shaking. "The mirror is controlling you." For a brief moment, Mordecai's eyes flickered, and Lyra thought she saw a glimmer of recognition in them. But then the shadows surged again, and he was lost, his mind trapped in the depths of the mirror's curse. Lyra knew she didn't have much time. If she didn't act quickly, the mirror would consume Mordecai completely, and the kingdom would fall into chaos. She had to find a way to break the curse, but how? The mirror was ancient, its magic beyond anything she had ever encountered. She needed answers, and there was only one place she could find them. Lyra's journey took her to the farthest reaches of the kingdom, to forgotten libraries and hidden sanctuaries where the oldest knowledge of magic was stored. She sought out scholars and mages who still remembered the legends of the Mirror of Souls, piecing together the fragments of its history. The mirror had been created by a sorcerer long ago, a man who had sought to control the very essence of souls. But in his ambition, He had unleashed a power greater than he could control, and the mirror had consumed him, trapping his soul within its depths. The only way to break the mirror's curse, Lyra learned, was through an act of true selflessness, an act of sacrifice that would sever the mirror's hold on the soul it had claimed. It was not a battle of magic or strength, but a battle of the heart. Armed with this knowledge, Lyra returned to Mordecai's fortress, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant risking her own life. Mordecai had been more than just a mentor to her, he had been like a father. She couldn't let him be consumed by the darkness, not when there was still a chance to save him. Lyra entered the grand hall once more, the weight of the mirror's presence pressing down on her. Mordecai was still there, locked in the mirror's grasp, his body trembling as the dark magic tore at him. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "Mordecai, listen to me. You can break free of this. You don't need the mirror's power." The shadows in the mirror swirled, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire room pulsed with dark energy. But Lyra didn't back down. She moved closer, standing between Mordecai and the mirror, her hands raised as if to shield him from its influence. "I won't let it take you," she said, her voice strong. "You taught me that magic is about more than power. It's about control, about understanding who you are and what you're capable of." Mordecai's eyes flickered again, and Lyra saw a moment of clarity in them. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's too late." "It's not," she insisted, her heart pounding. "You can still fight this. But you have to let go of the power. You have to trust me." The room grew colder, the shadows in the mirror growing more frantic as if sensing the threat to their hold on Mordecai. Lyra stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward the mirror's surface. The moment her fingers touched it, a shock of dark energy surged through her, but she didn't pull away. She focused on Mordecai, on the man she knew was still in there, fighting to break free. "You're stronger than this," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But you have to let go." Mordecai's face twisted in pain, his body convulsing as he fought against the mirror's control. The shadows wrapped tighter around him, but Lyra didn't falter. She kept her hand pressed to the mirror, her heart filled with determination, and then, with a final cry of anguish, Mordecai tore himself free of the mirror's grasp. The shadows recoiled, the surface of the mirror shattering with a deafening crash. Dark energy exploded from the artifact, rippling through the room and out into the kingdom, dispelling the storms and lifting the darkness that had plagued the land. Mordecai collapsed to the ground, his body weak and trembling, but his soul free at last. Lyra knelt beside him, her heart aching with relief. "You did it," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "You're free." Mordecai looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved me." The kingdom began to heal in the days that followed. The storm subsided, the crops began to grow again, and the people slowly returned to their lives, no longer living in fear of the dark magic that had once threatened them. Mordecai, though weakened, was free from the mirror's curse, and he vowed to spend the rest of his life making amends for the harm he had caused. As for Lyra, she knew that her journey was far from over. She had learned more than just magic in her time as Mordecai's apprentice. She had learned the power of selflessness, of sacrifice, and of the strength that came from standing up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. And though the mirror of souls was gone, its lessons remained, etched into her heart as a reminder that true power came not from magic, but from within. Lyra stood at the edge of the fortress, the cold wind tugging at her cloak, and watched as the last remnants of the dark clouds dissipated, giving way to a clear sky. The kingdom below was finally free from the curse that had loomed over it for far too long. Mordecai, weakened but alive, had returned to his chambers to rest, leaving Lyra alone to contemplate everything that had happened. She had faced her greatest challenge, not only as an apprentice but as a person. The mirror of souls had tested her resolve, her courage, and her belief in redemption. Now, with the threat gone, she wondered what came next. The weight of the mirror's destruction hung heavy on her, not because of what she had accomplished, but because of the responsibility that came with it. Saving Mordecai had been just the beginning. The kingdom had been ravaged, not only by the mirror's influence but by the years of fear and darkness Mordecai had spread in his quest for power. He had been consumed by his ambition, but now he was free. And with that freedom came the opportunity to rebuild, to repair the damage that had been done. Lyra knew that she would play a vital role in that rebuilding. The people of the kingdom had lost their trust in magic, in those who wielded it, and she understood why. They had seen what unchecked power could do, and it would take time to earn their trust again. But she was determined to help them see that magic, when used wisely, could be a force for good. She turned away from the view, her mind made up. There was work to be done, and she wouldn't shy away from it. She made her way through the halls of the fortress, her step steady and confident. She found Mordecai sitting by the fire, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his face drawn and tired. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile crossing his lips. "You should be resting," she said, taking a seat beside him. Mordecai chuckled softly, though there was little mirth in the sound. "Rest seems like a luxury I don't deserve," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Not after everything I've done." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her expression gentle but firm. "You can't change the past, Mordecai. But you have a chance to make things right now." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I don't even know where to begin. The people hate me, and rightfully so. I've brought nothing but misery to this kingdom." "They will learn to forgive, in time," Lyra said. "But you have to be willing to show them that you've changed. You have to be willing to do the work." Mordecai was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "I'm not sure I know how." Lyra looked at him, seeing the man who had once been her mentor, her guide. He was a shadow of the powerful mage she had known, but beneath the regret and guilt, she could still see the potential for redemption. "You start by helping," she said simply. "Help them rebuild, not just their homes, but their faith. Show them that you're more than the mistakes you've made." Mordecai nodded slowly, though there was doubt in his eyes. "And you, Lyra? What will you do?" "I'll stay," she answered without hesitation. "I'll help you. Together, we can restore what was lost." There was a long pause as Mordecai processed her words. Finally, he nodded again, this time with more conviction. "Thank you, Lyra. For everything." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The kingdom was in dire need of repair, and Lyra and Mordecai threw themselves into the work. The fortress, once a symbol of fear, became a hub of healing and restoration. Lyra helped organize efforts to rebuild the villages that had been devastated by the mirror's influence, working alongside farmers, blacksmiths, and townspeople. Slowly, the kingdom began to heal. Mordecai, though still weakened by his ordeal, used his magic to aid in the reconstruction, casting spells to repair buildings, purify the land, and calm the unnatural storms that had plagued the region for so long. His presence, once met with suspicion and fear, was slowly becoming a source of hope. The people, though hesitant at first, began to see the changes in him. They saw the remorse in his actions, the genuine desire to make amends, and gradually, they began to accept his help. Lyra found herself acting as a bridge between Mordecai and the people. She spent her days traveling between villages, reassuring those who still harbored doubts, and offering her own magic to assist where needed. The people trusted her in a way they had never trusted Mordecai, and she used that trust to show them that redemption was possible. One evening, after a long day of work, Lyra sat with Mordecai in the courtyard of the fortress, watching the sunset over the distant mountains. The air was cool, and for the first time in weeks, it felt peaceful. "You've done well," Mordecai said, breaking the silence. Lyra smiled. "We've done well. This is as much your doing as it is mine." Mordecai shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "No, Lyra. You've been the true force behind all of this. Without you, I'd still be lost. You've given me a second chance, and I'll never be able to repay you for that." Lyra's smile softened. "You don't have to repay me, Mordecai. This was never about debts or obligations. It's about doing what's right." Mordecai looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've grown into a remarkable woman," he said quietly. "I always knew you had the potential to be great, but I never imagined you'd surpass me." Lyra laughed softly, shaking her head. "I haven't surpassed you, Mordecai. I've just learned from your mistakes." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, watching the last light of the sun dip below the horizon. The kingdom was still fragile, still recovering, but Lyra knew that with time, it would flourish again. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the kingdom began to thrive. The crops grew tall and healthy, the villages were rebuilt, and the people started to move on from the dark times that had plagued them. Mordecai continued to work tirelessly, using his magic to aid in the restoration, but he also made sure to teach Lyra everything he knew. He was determined to pass on his knowledge, not just of magic, but of the lessons he had learned about power and responsibility. Lyra, for her part, absorbed everything he had to offer. She became a leader in her own right, guiding the kingdom through its recovery and ensuring that magic was used for the good of the people, not for personal gain. She never forgot the lessons of the Mirror of Souls, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and she made it her mission to ensure that no one else would fall into the same trap. Mordecai, though still haunted by the mistakes of his past, found a sense of peace in his work. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. He knew he could never fully atone for the harm he had caused, but he could try. And with Lyra by his side, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could leave behind a legacy worth remembering. In the end, it was not the magic that saved the kingdom, but the people themselves. The strength they found in each other, in their resilience and their hope, was what truly brought them back from the brink. And as Lyra stood on the steps of the fortress, watching the bustling streets below, she knew that the kingdom was in good hands. The Mirror of Souls was gone, but its lessons remained, etched into the hearts of those who had lived through its curse. Power, unchecked, could consume even the strongest of souls. But selflessness, compassion, and the willingness to do what was right, that was where true strength lay. And so, with the kingdom flourishing and her people safe, Lyra looked toward the future, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the Mirror of Souls had come to an end, but Lyra's story was only just beginning.